Sarah Martinez wiped down the sticky counter at Danny's diner for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee hung heavy in the air, mixing with the chatter of truckers and early commuters grabbing their morning fix. Her worn sneakers squeaked against the black and white checkered floor as she moved between tables, refilling cups and taking orders with a practiced smile. "More coffee, hun?" she asked the construction worker at table 6, already reaching for the pot before he nodded. This was her life now. 8 hours a day, 6 days a week, serving eggs over easy and listening to the same complaints about the weather, the economy, and whatever drama was unfolding on the morning news. Nobody in this small Indiana town knew that just 3 years ago, Sarah had been Staff Sergeant Martinez, leading a weapons maintenance unit in the Army. Nobody knew she could strip and reassemble an M4 carbine blindfolded in under 2 minutes. Nobody knew she had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, where her steady hands and sharp mind had kept her unit's weapons functioning in the harsh desert conditions that claimed so many rifles. The bell above the diner's front door chimed, and Sarah glanced up to see Tom Bradley sliding into his usual booth. Tom owned the gun shop down the street and came in every Tuesday morning for black coffee and wheat toast. He was one of the few people in town who knew about her military background, though even he didn't know the full extent of her expertise. "Morning, Tom," Sarah called out, already pouring his coffee. "The usual?" Tom nodded but seemed distracted, his weathered face creased with worry. "Sarah, you got a minute? I need to ask you something." She slid the coffee across his table and sat down across from him. The morning rush was over and Danny was in the back doing inventory, so she had a few minutes to spare. "What's eating at you?" she asked, noticing the tension in his shoulders. Tom leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You know that big military contract I've been trying to land? The one with the National Guard unit over in Columbus?" Sarah nodded. Tom had mentioned it a few times over the past months. Landing a contract to service weapons for the Guard would transform his small business from a struggling local shop into something much more substantial. "Well, they're coming here tomorrow for a demonstration. They want to see if my shop can handle their maintenance needs. Problem is, my usual guy who helps with the technical stuff just broke his arm in a motorcycle accident. I've got all these rifles that need to be serviced, and frankly, I'm not sure I can handle it all myself fast enough to impress them." Sarah stirred sugar into her own coffee, waiting for him to get to the point. "I know you were in the Army," Tom continued. "Did you ever work with weapons? I mean, really work with them, not just carry them around." For a moment, Sarah considered brushing off the question with a vague answer. She had gotten good at deflecting conversations about her military service. Most people in town assumed she had been a clerk or maybe a medic. It was easier that way, less complicated. But looking at Tom's worried expression, she felt something stir inside her that had been dormant for too long. The part of her that thrived on challenges, that took pride in technical precision, that missed the satisfaction of solving complex mechanical problems. "I might be able to help," she said carefully. "What exactly do you need?" Tom's eyes lit up with hope. "Basic maintenance and inspection on about 20 M4s. Nothing fancy, just proving we can handle routine servicing. Clean them, check the mechanisms, maybe demonstrate some assembly work." The Guard captain mentioned they're particularly interested in seeing quick, efficient work since they need their weapons back in service as fast as possible. Sarah found herself nodding before she fully realized what she was agreeing to. "When do they arrive?" 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. "Sarah, I'll pay you whatever you think is fair. This contract could save my business." She looked around the diner at the peeling paint on the walls and the permanently stained booth cushions, at the life she had built here that felt safe but somehow too small. The morning sun streamed through the front windows, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air, and for a moment she could almost smell the clean oil and metal of a properly maintained rifle. "I'll think about it," she said, but they both knew she had already decided. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. She served lunch to the regular crowd, cleaned tables and made small talk, but her mind was elsewhere. Her hands remembered the weight of an M4, the precise pressure needed to seat the bolt carrier group, the satisfying click of components falling into perfect alignment. That evening, alone in her small apartment above the hardware store, Sarah opened the closet in her bedroom and pulled out a box she hadn't touched in months. Inside were her military certificates, commendations, and a few photos from her deployment. At the bottom was a technical manual she had kept, dog-eared and annotated with her own notes on advanced maintenance techniques. She flipped through the pages, her muscle memory awakening as she studied the detailed diagrams. Tomorrow she would step back into a world she had tried to leave behind. Tomorrow she would remind herself and everyone else what she was truly capable of. But tonight, she was still just Sarah the waitress, living quietly in a small town where nobody expected much of anything from anyone. Tomorrow would change that, though she didn't yet realize how much. As she prepared for bed, Sarah caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. For the first time in months, there was something different in her eyes. A spark of anticipation, maybe even excitement. She had forgotten what it felt like to look forward to a challenge, to feel truly useful again. She had no idea that by this time tomorrow her secret would be out, and her quiet life in Indiana would be turned completely upside down. Sarah arrived at Bradley's gun shop 30 minutes before the National Guard delegation was scheduled to appear. Tom was already there, nervously arranging cleaning supplies and trying to make his cluttered workspace look more professional. 20 M4 carbines lay disassembled on the long workbench, their components sorted into neat piles that somehow still managed to look overwhelming. "Thank God you're here," Tom said, his relief evident. "I've been up since 5 trying to get organized. These guard folks don't mess around. If we can't prove we're up to their standards, they'll take their business to one of the big shops in Indianapolis." Sarah rolled up her sleeves and surveyed the weapons. Each rifle needed a complete inspection and cleaning, with several requiring minor repairs to firing pins and extractors. In her Army days, this would have been a routine morning's work. But that was when she had a fully equipped armory and a team of trained soldiers. Here she had Tom's basic shop tools in her own hands. "Have you tested the headspace on any of these?" she asked, picking up a bolt and examining it closely. Tom looked confused. "The what now?" Sarah realized she needed to adjust her expectations. Tom was a good man and a decent gunsmith, but his experience was mainly with hunting rifles and civilian firearms. Military weapons maintenance required a different level of precision and knowledge. "Don't worry about it," she said. "I'll handle the technical stuff. You focus on making sure we have enough cleaning solvent and rags." She began with the rifle that looked to be in the worst condition. Years of training kicked in as her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Strip the weapon, inspect each component for wear or damage, clean everything thoroughly, check tolerances, and reassemble. The familiar routine was oddly comforting. The bell above the shop door chimed at exactly 2 o'clock. Tom straightened his shirt and walked toward the front to greet their visitors. But Sarah kept working, wanting to finish the rifle she had in progress. "Gentlemen, welcome to Bradley's gun shop," she heard Tom say. "I'm Tom Bradley, the owner. Let me show you what we can do for you." "Captain Rodriguez, Indiana National Guard," came a crisp voice. "This is Sergeant First Class Wilson and Specialist Garcia. We're here to evaluate your maintenance capabilities for our unit's weapons." As footsteps approached the work area, Sarah became aware of how she must look. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a t-shirt that had seen better days, and her hands were dark with gun oil. She probably looked like exactly what everyone in town thought she was, just Tom's helper, maybe someone he hired off the street for the day. "This is Sarah," Tom said as the 3 soldiers came into view. "She's helping me with the demonstration today." Captain Rodriguez was a compact man in his 40s with intelligent eyes and the bearing of someone used to command. He nodded politely at Sarah but clearly expected Tom to do most of the talking. Sergeant Wilson looked skeptical as he examined the partially disassembled weapons, while Specialist Garcia seemed more interested in the shop's equipment than the people. "We need to know you can handle routine maintenance on our M4s, Captain Rodriguez explained. "Quick turnaround, reliable work, and attention to detail. Our soldiers depend on these weapons, so there's no room for error." "Absolutely," Tom said. "Sarah here has military experience, and between the 2 of us we can handle whatever you need." Sarah noticed Sergeant Wilson suppress a slight smile at this. She could read his expression easily. Another small-town shop owner claiming military expertise through some relative or friend who had served briefly in a non-combat role. "Mind if we watch you work?" Captain Rodriguez asked. "Not at all," Tom replied, though Sarah could hear the nervousness in his voice. Sarah picked up the next rifle and began the disassembly process. Her movements were swift and sure, each component removed in the proper sequence and placed in its designated spot. She could feel the soldiers watching her, and she sensed their surprise at her obvious competence. "You served?" Sergeant Wilson asked, his tone more respectful now. A few years, Sarah replied without looking up, already deep into the cleaning process. What unit? This from Captain Rodriguez, who had moved closer to observe her technique. Maintenance Company 82nd Airborne, Sarah said, using a bore brush with practiced precision. 2 deployments to Afghanistan. The atmosphere in the room shifted perceptibly. The 82nd Airborne commanded respect in military circles, and Afghanistan meant real-world experience under difficult conditions. How long since you've worked on these weapons? Specialist Garcia asked. About 3 years, Sarah admitted, reassembling the lower receiver with smooth, economical movements. She could complete this rifle in another few minutes, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the way the soldiers were watching her with new interest. Or maybe it was the challenge she heard in Specialist Garcia's voice. Whatever it was, Sarah decided to stop holding back. Actually, she said, setting down her tools, let me show you something. She moved to the workbench where several rifles lay completely disassembled. Components were scattered across the surface. Bolt carriers, charging handles, triggers, springs, and dozens of smaller parts. Time me, she said simply. Captain Rodriguez checked his watch. Starting now. What happened next would be talked about in the Indiana National Guard for years to come. Sarah's hands moved like a dancer's, picking up components with absolute certainty and fitting them together in a blur of precise movements. No hesitation, no checking of parts, no trial and error. Each piece went exactly where it belonged on the first try. Her fingers seemed to know instinctively which part came next. The bolt carrier group slid home with a satisfying click. The charging handle seated perfectly. Pins aligned on the first attempt. The rhythm was mesmerizing. Click, slide, snap, click, slide, snap. Sergeant Wilson found himself holding his breath. He had seen plenty of soldiers work on M4s, but this was something else entirely. This was artistry. Jesus, Specialist Garcia whispered, forgetting military protocol entirely. The trigger group went in like it belonged there. The safety selector moved smoothly into position. Sarah grabbed another scattered rifle and began the same process, her movements never slowing, never hesitating. By the time Captain Rodriguez called out 2 minutes, Sarah had completely assembled 3 M4 carbines from scattered parts. Each weapon was perfect, every component properly seated and functioning. The silence in the shop stretched for several seconds. Ma'am, Captain Rodriguez said finally, I think we need to have a longer conversation. Word traveled fast in a small town like Millfield. By Thursday morning, half the population had heard some version of what happened at Bradley's gun shop. The stories grew with each telling. Sarah had assembled 10 rifles in under a minute. She had been a special forces operator. She had single-handedly maintained weapons for an entire brigade in Afghanistan. None of the stories were quite accurate, but they all captured the same sense of astonishment. Sarah tried to maintain her normal routine, showing up for her shift at Danny's diner at 6 in the morning as she had for the past 2 years. But everything felt different now. Customers who had barely acknowledged her existence before were suddenly interested in conversation. The usual morning crowd of truckers and construction workers kept glancing her way, whispering among themselves. Is it true you were some kind of army expert? Asked Betty Morrison, the bank teller who usually just ordered coffee and toast without making eye contact. I did my job like everyone else, Sarah replied, refilling Betty's cup and hoping to end the conversation there. But Betty wasn't satisfied. Tom Bradley's been telling everyone you're the most skilled weapons person he's ever seen. Says those National Guard soldiers were practically speechless. Sarah escaped to the kitchen, but even Danny, her boss, was looking at her differently. He was a Vietnam veteran himself, and she could see the questions in his eyes. Why was someone with her apparent skills working as a waitress? What had brought her to their little town? What else didn't they know about the quiet woman who had been serving their coffee for 2 years? The morning rush was more intense than usual, not because there were more customers, but because everyone seemed to want to linger, to study her, to figure out how they had missed something so significant about someone they saw every day. Sarah found herself moving faster, being more efficient just to avoid the prolonged conversations. Around 10 o'clock, the bell chimed and Tom Bradley walked in, followed by Captain Rodriguez. The diner went quiet as conversation stopped mid-sentence. Everyone knew who the uniformed man was. Word of the National Guard's visit had spread as quickly as everything else. Sarah, Tom called out, could we talk for a minute? She poured coffee for both men and sat down at Tom's usual booth. Captain Rodriguez looked uncomfortable with the attention they were attracting, but he seemed determined to have this conversation. "I've been making some calls since yesterday," he said quietly. "I spoke with your former commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Williams." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had maintained minimal contact with her old unit since leaving the Army, preferring to let that chapter of her life remain closed. "He told me some interesting things," Captain Rodriguez continued. "Said you were the best weapons specialist he ever worked with. Said you could diagnose problems that stumped armory technicians with 20 years of experience. Said you developed some modifications to the M4 platform that are still being used by units in the field." Sarah stirred sugar into her coffee, saying nothing. "He also said you left the Army suddenly after your second deployment, turned down a promotion to Sergeant First Class and disappeared. No forwarding address, no contact with anyone from your unit. He's been wondering what happened to you for 3 years." The weight of curious stares from around the diner was becoming oppressive. Sarah could feel every conversation had stopped, every ear straining to catch what was being said at their table. "Maybe we could continue this somewhere more private," she suggested. "Actually," Captain Rodriguez said, "I think what I have to say might interest more people than just you." He raised his voice slightly, addressing the room. "I'm here to offer Ms. Martinez a position as a civilian weapons maintenance contractor with the Indiana National Guard. The job would involve training our soldiers, maintaining our armory, and consulting on technical issues. It's a full-time position with excellent benefits and a salary that's probably 3 times what she's making here." The silence that followed was profound. Even Danny had emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron and staring at Sarah with amazement. "You're offering her a job based on one demonstration?" asked Bill Patterson, the local mechanic, his voice carrying a note of skepticism. Captain Rodriguez smiled. "Sir, what your neighbor did yesterday isn't something you learn from a manual. That level of skill comes from years of intensive training and real-world experience. The Army invested probably $500,000 in her education and training. Frankly, having someone with her expertise working in a diner is like having a brain surgeon flipping burgers." Sarah felt the heat rising in her cheeks. She had never wanted this kind of attention, never wanted to be the center of speculation and gossip. The quiet life she had built in Millfield was being dismantled by the very skills she had tried to leave behind. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course," Captain Rodriguez replied. "Take your time. But I should mention that word about your abilities is probably going to spread beyond our unit. The Army is always looking for experienced contractors, and the private sector pays even better than we do." After the captain left, the diner buzzed with conversation. Sarah tried to continue her shift, but the constant questions and comments made normal work impossible. Everyone wanted to know about her military service, why she had kept it secret, and what she was going to do about the job offer. By lunchtime, 3 more people had approached her with opportunities. Jim Reynolds, who owned the largest construction company in the county, wanted to know if her mechanical skills extended to heavy equipment. Maria Santos, who ran the community college's vocational program, asked if she would consider teaching. Even Father McKenna from St. Mary's Church wondered if she might help with their youth program, suggesting that her disciplinary background might benefit some of the more troubled teenagers. Sarah felt like her carefully constructed world was spinning out of control. For 3 years, she had been just Sarah the waitress, dependable, unremarkable, safely invisible. Now everyone was looking at her with new eyes, seeing possibilities and potential she had deliberately hidden. That afternoon, she received a phone call that changed everything. The caller identified himself as Marcus Chen, a representative from Blackwater-type private security firm that specialized in military contracting. "Ms. Martinez," he said, "we understand you have exceptional skills in weapons maintenance and training. We have contracts with several government agencies and overseas clients who are always looking for qualified personnel. The compensation package starts at 6 figures plus benefits and bonuses. Would you be interested in discussing opportunities?" Sarah hung up without answering, but she knew it wouldn't be the last such call. Somehow, in the span of 24 hours, she had gone from invisible to very much in demand. The question was, what was she going to do about it? That evening, alone in her apartment, Sarah stared at the phone as it rang again and again. Each call represented a door opening, an opportunity to use her skills and training in ways that would be meaningful and well compensated. But each call also represented a step away from the simple, quiet life she thought she wanted. She had a choice to make, and she was beginning to realize that hiding from her past was no longer an option. Sarah's apartment phone rang at 7 in the morning on Friday. She had been awake for an hour, staring at the ceiling and trying to decide what to do about the growing number of job offers. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice that greeted her was familiar. "Sarah, this is Lieutenant Colonel Williams, her former commanding officer, the man who had tried to convince her to stay in the Army 3 years ago, who had offered her promotions and special assignments, who had watched her walk away from everything she had trained for without ever understanding why." "Sir," she said, automatically falling back into military courtesy. "I heard you've been making quite an impression in Indiana," he said, and she could hear the mixture of amusement and concern in his voice. "Captain Rodriguez called me yesterday with some very interesting reports." Sarah said nothing, waiting for him to continue. "I also got a call from Marcus Chen at Blackstone Security. Seems word about your demonstration has reached some influential people. There are job offers coming your way that most people in our field would kill for." "I didn't ask for any of this," Sarah said quietly. "I know you didn't. That's why I'm calling. Sarah, I need you to understand something. The skills you have, the knowledge you possess, it's not just valuable, it's rare. There may be 50 people in the entire country who can do what you did the other day, and most of them are still active duty or already contracted with major defense firms." He paused, and when he continued, his voice was more serious. "But more importantly, I think I finally understand why you left. You were burned out, weren't you? Not physically, but emotionally. You'd given everything to the Army for 8 years, deployed twice to a war zone, watched friends get hurt, dealt with the pressure of keeping weapons functioning when lives depended on it. And you needed to step back and be normal for a while." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. In 3 years, no one had come close to understanding what she had been going through when she left the military. The assumption had always been that she couldn't handle the pressure, or that she had been somehow inadequate. But Colonel Williams understood that sometimes the most capable people are the ones who burn brightest and fastest. "The question now," he continued, "is whether you've had enough time to heal, because Sarah, the world needs people like you, not just for the technical skills, but for the leadership, the dedication, the ability to perform under pressure. You can't hide in a small-town diner forever." After he hung up, Sarah sat in her kitchen drinking coffee and thinking about the woman she used to be. Staff Sergeant Martinez had been confident, decisive, respected by her peers, and trusted by her superiors. She had been someone who mattered, whose work had real impact. But she had also been exhausted, stressed, and isolated by the very competence that set her apart from others. The phone rang again. This time it was Danny from the diner. "Sarah, I hate to bother you at home, but we've got a situation here. There are reporters outside wanting to talk to you. Apparently someone posted a video online of you assembling those rifles, and it's going viral. I've got news vans in my parking lot." Sarah's heart sank. She looked out her window and saw a news van parked across the street from her apartment building. "I'll be right there," she said. By the time she reached the diner, the situation had grown even more chaotic. Not only were there reporters, but a crowd of curious townspeople had gathered, along with what appeared to be military personnel in civilian clothes. Tom Bradley was standing near his gun shop talking animatedly to a woman with a microphone, while a camera crew filmed. Sarah tried to enter through the diner's back door, but she was spotted immediately. "There she is," someone called out, and suddenly she was surrounded by reporters shouting questions. "Ms. Martinez, is it true you can assemble military weapons faster than active-duty soldiers? What made you leave the Army to work as a waitress? How does it feel to suddenly be famous? Are you going to accept any of these job offers?" Sarah pushed through the crowd without answering and made it inside the diner, where Danny quickly locked the door behind her. But through the windows she could see the mob of people pressing closer, cameras recording everything. "This is insane," she muttered. "It gets worse," Danny said, handing her his tablet. "Look at this." The video had been posted on social media by Specialist Garcia, who had apparently filmed her demonstration with his phone. In less than 24 hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times. The comments ranged from amazed admiration to skeptical disbelief, to job offers from companies around the world. But what struck Sarah most were the comments from other veterans. Messages of support, recognition, and understanding from people who recognized not just her technical skills, but the deeper story behind them. They knew what it meant for someone with her abilities to be working as a waitress, They understood the complexity of transitioning from military service to civilian life. "I can't stay here," Sarah said, looking at the crowd outside. "This is going to destroy the peace of this town." "Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing," Danny said gently. "Sarah, I've watched you for 2 years. You're good at this job, but you're not happy. You go through the motions, you smile when you need to, but I can see it in your eyes. You're just marking time." Before she could respond, there was a knock at the back door. Danny opened it to reveal Captain Rodriguez, who slipped inside quickly. "Ms. Martinez, I apologize for this circus. We never intended for any of this to become public. What do you want?" Sarah asked, feeling overwhelmed by the attention and pressure. "I want to offer you an alternative," he said. "Instead of all these private sector jobs and media attention, consider coming to work with us. We can provide structure, purpose, and the chance to train the next generation of soldiers. You'd be serving your country again, but on your own terms." He pulled out a folder and set it on the counter. "This is a proposed contract. Civilian weapons maintenance specialist based at Camp Atterbury. You'd work with guard units from across the state, training soldiers, maintaining equipment, and consulting on technical problems. Good salary, full benefits, and the respect that comes with the position." Sarah stared at the folder without opening it. "The best part," Captain Rodriguez added, "is that it's steady, meaningful work without the drama of private contracting or the pressure of active duty. You'd be part of a team again, but with the freedom to live your own life." Through the window, Sarah could see the crowd had grown even larger. Someone had set up a folding table and was selling coffee to the reporters and curious onlookers. Her quiet life in Millfield was officially over. The question now was, what would replace it? She opened the folder and began to read, while outside the cameras continued to roll, and the world waited to see what the waitress who could assemble an M4 in seconds would decide to do next. 3 weeks after the video went viral, Sarah found herself standing in front of a classroom full of National Guard soldiers at Camp Atterbury, holding an M4 carbine and feeling more nervous than she had in years. The soldiers looked young, eager, and slightly skeptical. They had all seen the viral video, and she could read the questions in their eyes. Was she really as good as the internet claimed, or was this just hype? "Good morning," she began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Sarah Martinez, and I'm here to teach you everything I know about maintaining your weapons." The transition from diner waitress to military contractor had been surreal. After accepting Captain Rodriguez's offer, everything had moved quickly. Security clearance renewal, paperwork orientation, and suddenly she was back in a world of uniforms and regulations that felt both foreign and familiar. Her apartment in Millfield sat empty now. She had rented a small place near the base, close enough to commute but far enough away to maintain some privacy. The media attention had eventually died down, but she still got recognized occasionally, which made her uncomfortable. "Before we start with the technical stuff," she continued, addressing the classroom, "I want you to understand something. Your weapon is not just a tool, it's a partner. It will keep you alive if you take care of it, but it will fail you if you don't. Everything I'm going to teach you is about building that relationship." She began with basics, but quickly realized that many of these soldiers had learned maintenance through abbreviated training programs that focused on speed over understanding. They could perform the required procedures, but they didn't really understand why each step mattered. "Specialist Johnson," she called to a young soldier in the front row, "come up here and show me how you clean your bolt carrier group." Johnson approached confidently and began the standard procedure. His movements were competent but mechanical, following the steps he had memorized without really looking at what he was doing. "Stop," Sarah said gently. "Look at what you're holding. Really look at it." She guided him to examine the bolt more carefully, pointing out signs of wear that he had missed, carbon buildup in areas he had skipped, and small problems that could become major failures under stress. "In Afghanistan," she told the class, "I saw rifles jam because someone missed a spot like this during cleaning. In a firefight, that jam could mean the difference between coming home and not coming home." The room grew quieter, more focused. These soldiers understood that this wasn't just academic training. It was survival skills. As the days passed, Sarah found herself settling into a routine that felt right for the first time in years. She taught classes, worked with individual soldiers who needed extra help, and consulted on technical problems that stumped the base armory staff. The work was challenging and meaningful, using all of her skills and experience. But the biggest surprise was how much she enjoyed the teaching aspect. Watching a young soldier's face light up when they finally understood a complex concept, seeing someone's confidence grow as their technical skills improved, it was more rewarding than she had expected. "Ma'am," said Private First Class Garcia after one particularly intensive training session, "can I ask you something?" Sarah nodded while packing up the disassembled weapons they had been working with. "Why did you leave the Army if you were so good at this? I mean, everyone says you could have been a sergeant major, maybe even gone to officer candidate school." It was a question she had been asked multiple times in the past weeks, and she had developed a standard answer about wanting to try civilian life. But looking at Garcia's earnest face, she decided to be more honest. "I was burned out," she said simply. "After 8 years and 2 deployments, I had given everything I had to give. I needed time to figure out who I was when I wasn't Staff Sergeant Martinez." Garcia nodded thoughtfully. "And did you? Figure it out, I mean?" Sarah considered the question as she secured the last rifle in its case. "I'm still working on it. But I think I'm starting to understand that who I was in the Army and who I am now don't have to be completely different people. Maybe the best version of me is someone who takes the skills and experience from my military service and uses them to help others, but on my own terms." That evening, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. It was Betty Morrison, the bank teller from Danny's Diner. "Sarah? I hope you don't mind me calling. Tom Bradley gave me your number." "Of course not, Betty. How are things in Millfield?" "Well, that's actually why I'm calling. We've had some interesting developments since you left. Do you remember my nephew Jake? The one who was having trouble after high school, getting into fights and generally heading in the wrong direction?" Sarah remembered Jake Morrison, a bright kid who seemed angry at the world and unwilling to listen to anyone. "Jake saw that video of you and it changed something in him. He kept asking questions about you, about the military, about having discipline and purpose. Long story short, he enlisted in the National Guard last week." Sarah was surprised. Jake had always struck her as someone who would rebel against military structure. "Here's the thing," Betty continued. "He specifically requested to be assigned to Camp Atterbury because he heard you were working there. He wants you to be his instructor." "Betty, I don't know if that's possible. There are procedures for training assignments, and I can't just—" "I'm not asking you to pull strings," Betty interrupted. "I'm just asking you to know that he's coming, and that you've already had an impact on his life just by showing him what's possible. That boy has been lost for 2 years, and for the first time he has direction." After the call ended, Sarah walked outside to the small porch of her rental house. The base was quiet at this hour, with only the distant sound of vehicles and the occasional call from the training areas. She thought about Jake Morrison and the other young people she might influence through her work. For 3 years she had tried to hide from her past and her capabilities. But now she was beginning to understand that hiding had never been the answer. Her skills, her experience, and her knowledge were gifts that came with responsibilities. She could use them to make a difference in people's lives, to help young soldiers become competent and confident, to ensure that others wouldn't face the same challenges she had faced without proper preparation. The woman who had left the Army 3 years ago had been exhausted and seeking escape. The woman who had worked as a waitress had been hiding and healing. But the woman she was becoming now was someone who could bridge both worlds, bringing military expertise to civilian life while maintaining the balance and perspective she had gained during her time away. A month later, Jake Morrison arrived at Camp Atterbury for his first drill weekend. Sarah watched him climb off the bus with the other new recruits, looking nervous but determined. He was taller than she remembered, and the angry slouch was gone, replaced by something that looked like hope. "Specialist Morrison reporting for training, ma'am," he said when he spotted her, his attempt at military bearing both earnest and awkward. "At ease, Jake," she said with a slight smile. "Welcome to Camp Atterbury." Over the following months, Sarah watched Jake transform from an angry, directionless teenager into a competent soldier. But more than that, she saw him discover confidence and purpose. He excelled in her weapons training classes, showing not just technical aptitude but the kind of attention to detail that marked natural instructors. "Ma'am," he said to her one day after a particularly challenging training exercise, "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For showing me that there's more than one way to serve, more than one path to success. Before I saw that video, I thought people like me only had a few options and none of them were good. But watching you, seeing what you accomplished, it made me realize that with the right training and dedication, I could be someone who matters. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with accomplishment and everything to do with purpose. This was why she had come back. Not for the recognition or the salary or even for her own satisfaction, but for the opportunity to help others find their path. That evening, she called Lieutenant Colonel Williams. "Sir, I wanted to thank you for the conversation we had a few months ago. You were right about needing time to heal, but you were also right about not being able to hide forever. I take it things are going well at Camp Atterbury? Better than well. I'm doing work that matters, helping soldiers who need guidance, and I've found a way to serve that doesn't burn me out. I think I figured out how to be both Staff Sergeant Martinez and Sarah the person." There was a pause, and when Colonel Williams spoke again, his voice carried approval and something that might have been pride. "Sarah, you've always been exceptional at whatever you put your mind to. I'm glad you found a way to use those gifts that works for your life now. The Army is better for having you back even in this capacity." As Sarah hung up the phone, she reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. From Staff Sergeant Martinez to Sarah the waitress to Sarah the contractor and instructor, each phase had been necessary. Each had taught her something essential about herself. The viral video had been an accident, an unintended revelation of skills she had tried to keep hidden. But it had also been a catalyst that forced her to confront the question of what she wanted to do with her life and her abilities. She had learned that running from her past wasn't the answer, but neither was returning to it unchanged. Outside her window, she could see soldiers moving between buildings, preparing for evening training exercises. Tomorrow she would teach another class, work with more young men and women who were learning to be soldiers. Some of them would struggle with the technical aspects, others with the discipline and responsibility, but all of them would benefit from working with someone who understood not just the mechanics of weapons maintenance, but the deeper lessons about duty, competence, and finding purpose in service to something larger than yourself. 2 years after the viral video changed her life, Sarah stood before the largest gathering she had ever addressed. The National Defense University had invited her to speak at their annual symposium on military training and readiness. The auditorium was filled with officers, defense contractors, and policymakers, people who shaped how the military trained and equipped its soldiers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, looking out at the sea of uniforms and business suits, "I want to tell you about a young soldier named Jake Morrison, and about the difference that proper training can make in someone's life." She had never been comfortable with public speaking, but over the past 2 years, she had learned to channel her nervousness into passion for the subject matter. Today, she was here to advocate for better technical training programs and to share what she had learned about bridging the gap between military and civilian worlds. When Jake first arrived at Camp Atterbury, he could barely field strip an M4 without consulting the manual. 6 months later, he was teaching other soldiers. A year after that, he was accepted into the Army's Advanced Weapons Maintenance School, but more importantly, he had discovered confidence, purpose, and pride in competent work. The audience was attentive, but Sarah knew that many of them had heard similar success stories before. What made her presentation different was her perspective on the broader implications of technical training. The skills we teach soldiers about maintaining their weapons aren't just about keeping rifles functioning, she continued. We're teaching attention to detail, problem-solving under pressure, and the understanding that excellence in small things leads to excellence in big things. These lessons translate directly to civilian careers and to life in general. After her presentation, Sarah was approached by a woman in civilian clothes who looked familiar. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the Veterans Administration. We met briefly at a conference last year." Sarah remembered her now, a researcher who studied veteran transition programs. "I've been following your work at Camp Atterbury with great interest. The retention rates and performance metrics from soldiers who go through your training programs are remarkable. But what really caught my attention was something else entirely." Dr. Walsh pulled out a tablet and showed Sarah a series of charts and graphs. "We've been tracking veterans who have transitioned to civilian careers after completing your programs. Compared to soldiers with similar backgrounds who received standard training, your students show significantly higher rates of employment, job satisfaction, and successful integration into civilian life." Sarah studied the data with interest. She had known that her teaching methods were effective for military purposes, but she hadn't realized the broader impact. The correlation is too strong to be coincidental. Dr. Walsh continued. We think your approach, combining technical skills with leadership development and personal confidence building, is creating soldiers who are better prepared for life after the military. We'd like to study your methods and possibly implement them more widely. That evening, Sarah called Tom Bradley to share the news about the research results. I'm not surprised, Tom said. You know, business at the shop has picked up considerably since all this started. Not because of the publicity, but because I learned so much from working with you that day. You taught me to see the bigger picture, to understand that technical competence is just the foundation for everything else. Sarah smiled. Tom had indeed become a much more skilled gunsmith, but more importantly, he had gained confidence in his abilities and expanded his business to include training programs for local law enforcement. Speaking of the bigger picture, Tom continued, I got a call yesterday from someone you might find interesting. Remember Captain Rodriguez? Of course. How is he? He's Colonel Rodriguez now, and he's been assigned to develop new training protocols for the entire National Guard. He wants to base the program on what you've been doing at Camp Atterbury. He's calling it the Martinez method, Sarah laughed. The Martinez method? That sounds way too official for what I do. Maybe, but it's working. Sarah, you've influenced hundreds of soldiers directly, and now your approach might influence thousands more. That's not something that happens by accident. After hanging up, Sarah walked through her neighborhood, thinking about how much her life had changed. She lived in a larger apartment now in a community where she was known and respected. She had meaningful work, financial security, and most importantly, a sense of purpose that felt sustainable. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jake Morrison, who was now stationed at Fort Bragg. Ma'am.
I wanted you to know that I just got promoted to specialist and was selected to attend the advanced leadership course.
I also got engaged to a wonderful woman I met through the base volunteer program. I don't think any of this would have happened without the foundation you gave me. Thank you for seeing something in me that I didn't see in myself. Sarah smiled and typed back, I didn't give you anything that wasn't already there. I just helped you find it. Congratulations on everything. As she reached her apartment building, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. The viral video had been an accident, but it had forced her to confront fundamental questions about purpose, identity, and service. She had learned that her military experience wasn't something to hide from or be ashamed of, but rather a foundation for continued growth and contribution. The waitress who had assembled an M4 in seconds had been hiding her light under a bushel, afraid of the responsibilities that came with exceptional abilities. But the woman she had become understood that gifts came with obligations, to use them wisely, to help others develop their own capabilities, and to serve something larger than personal comfort or security. She thought about all the young soldiers she had trained, the officers she had consulted with, and the programs she had helped develop. Each interaction had ripple effects that extended far beyond the immediate training objectives. She was helping to create not just better soldiers, but better citizens who would take the lessons of discipline, competence, and service with them into civilian careers and community leadership. Her phone rang as she entered her apartment. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice was familiar. Sarah, this is Lieutenant Colonel Williams. I have a proposition for you, sir. I've been promoted to colonel and assigned to head up a new training initiative at the Pentagon. We're developing programs to help veterans transition their military skills to civilian careers. I want you to lead the technical training component. It would mean moving to Washington, working with veterans from all branches of the military, and helping to shape policy at the highest levels. Sarah sat down, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the opportunity. It's a big decision, Colonel Williams continued, but I can't think of anyone better suited for the job. You've proven that you can bridge military and civilian worlds, that you can teach not just technical skills but life skills, and that you understand both the challenges and the opportunities that veterans face. Can I think about it? Of course. But Sarah, this is a chance to influence thousands of veterans across the entire military. It's a chance to take everything you've learned and apply it on a national scale. After he hung up, Sarah stood at her window looking out at the lights of the base in the distance. 3 years ago, she had been hiding from her past and her capabilities. Now she was being offered the opportunity to shape the future of military training and veteran transition programs. The Waitress who could assemble an M4 in seconds had become something she never expected. A leader, a teacher, and an advocate for the transformative power of competent, purposeful work. Whatever decision she made about the Pentagon offer, she knew that her journey was far from over. Outside, she could see soldiers moving between buildings, beginning their evening training routines. Tomorrow, some of them would be in her classes, learning not just how to maintain their weapons, but how to maintain their confidence, their sense of purpose, and their belief in their own potential. And that, she realized, might be the most important assembly of all.